Before we begin, is there anything that we need to steer clear of? Anything that's kind of like a third rail for this project?
No, I can't think of it.
Okay.
Anybody may be offended is dead now.
Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from listeners like you who support us through Patreon and Substack. Bonus material, thank you gifts, and more await at patreon.com/IHearOfSherlock and at ihearofsherlock.substack.com. And now you can enjoy some iHo's swag, mugs, notepads, and oval stickers, available in our store. Find it at ihearofsherlock.com/merchandise.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 332, Irregular Chronicles of the Early 50s.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became his chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, it's I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we interview authors, editors, creators, and other prominent Sherlockians on various aspects of the great detective in popular culture.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Walder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
I'm Bill Curtis. This is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Now here are your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Walder.
Why, thank you, Bill Curtis. Yes, it is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Walder.
And Bert, you don't look like you're in your early 50s at all.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, that's... I'll take that as a compliment, because I take anything as a compliment.
No, come on. You look like you're in your late 40s.
Well, I'm certainly late. That's absolutely right. But I'll be here any minute.
Yeah, I'm reminded of late comedian Dennis Wolfberg, who said in one of his stand-up bits, I'm in my late 30s, my very late 30s, I'm 41. Oh, goodness. Well, we will be taking a trek back into the heyday of the Sherlockian world. It's going to be a rather golden time in the mid-1950s, early to mid-1950s, in a chat with Julie McKuras and Bill Mason, talking about their latest contribution to Sherlockian scholarship in a piece from the Baker Street Irregulars press. And it's the history series, the archival series, called Irregular Chronicles of the Early 50s. It's a fascinating discussion. Of course, we also have some other gems lined up for you. We're going to be talking about what's going on in the world of Sherlockian societies. When we open the Sherlockian calendar, I think we find ourselves into the second half of the month of June, if I'm not mistaken. We'll take you along for that ride there. And we also have another wonderful contribution from our film reviewer, Christian Mongard, who's been doing a dynamite job with his Examining the Picture series. And, of course, stay tuned for Canonical Couplet, the Sherlockian quiz program where we give you 2 lines of poetry and ask you to submit a guess as to which story we're talking about. Everyone who enters has a chance to win. We'll have that random drawing later in the show, so stay tuned to hear if you've won. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so in a number of ways. You can do it on Patreon. You can do it on Substack. You can sign up and subscribe on an annual or a monthly basis with either one of those. There's a discount if you choose annual. And, of course, if you would like a piece of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere merch, we do have mugs for sale and notepads. Check those out at our merch store. We have a link in the show notes to those, or on our website. You can find your way to iHo's merch wherever you would like to get it. Well, let's get out into the wider world of Sherlockian societies, Bert, with the Sherlockian calendar. Do you remember where we left off last month?
Yeah, we were looking at the Sherlockian calendar.
Very good.
Yeah. You can't fool me that easily.
I was going to say, you are much sharper than your canonical couplet answers indicate.
Yeah. Well, we were probably ending at the middle of the month, so we probably ended at the 15th, I would think.
That sounds about right. Let me check my notes here so we're not completely...
Wait a minute.
We
this
did
is the first I hear. You take notes?
No. Yeah, we did the first half of June.
June, yeah.
So we are now into the second half of June. Why don't you pick us up on June 19th?
June 19th. So we're skipping over the 16th and the 17th and the 18th, are we?
In June? There aren't any 16th and 17th.
Oh, I'm sorry.
meetings.
I'm in the wrong month there. Sorry. The 19th.
See, folks, maybe he's not as bright as he indicated.
Oh, I'm definitely not as bright as I indicated. It's a dim bulb, my own. Yeah. Okay, June. All right, fine. June 19th. You need to go to St. Charles, Missouri, because the Harpooners of the Sea Unicorn are having a meeting, and Jonathan Basford will tell you more, or take a look at harpooners.wordpress.com.
On the 20th, the very next day, you can participate in a virtual study group with the Norwegian Explorers. They can be found at norwegianexplorers.org.
And the same day, on June 20th, Nashville, Tennessee, the Nashville Scholars of the Three-Pipe Problem are having lunch. And Billy Fields can tell you more, and they're also at nashvillescholars.com.
And on the 21st in Madison, Wisconsin, there's an in-person meeting of the notorious Canary Trainers. Johanna Draper Carlson is your guide. You can find out more at comicsworthreading.com/Canary Trainers.
And then June 25th, the Afghanistan Perceivers are having a virtual meeting. So you can all join if you contact Brian Wilson and look at www.tulsa-sherlock.org.
It looks like the illustrious clients on June 27th will be taking a field trip. If you are in the Indianapolis area and you fancy going out on a field trip with the illustrious clients, you can get in touch with Louise Haskett and find out more at facebook.com/illustriousclients.
And also on June 27th in Schiller Park, Illinois, Tourists International SS are having a dinner meeting, and John Schimberg can tell you more, or you can look at their website, touristinternational.org.
And because the Midwest shouldn't have all the fun on the 27th, our pal Eric Deckers in Winter Garden, Florida, is hosting another meeting of the Orange County Pips of Orlando. It's going to be a breakfast meeting. You can find out more at meetup.com/orange-county-pips.
And last, on June 29th in Chicago, Illinois, the Sublibrarians, scion of the Baker Street Irregulars in the American Library Association, are having their annual meeting, the Sublibrarians, scion of the BSI in the ALA. And Beth Galigo can tell you more.
Well, that wraps it up for the second half of June in the Sherlockian calendar. If you have items that you'd like to have added to the calendar, get in touch with Ron Fish at the Sherlockian Calendar, sherlockiancalendar.com. Bill Mason has been a frequent speaker at Sherlockian gatherings throughout the United States and Canada, and is the author of 2 books, Pursuing Sherlock Holmes and A Holmes by Any Other Name. His writings have appeared in the Baker Street Journal, where he won the Morley Montgomery Award in 2016, as well as Canadian Holmes and other journals and anthologies. He's the founder of the Fresh Rashers of Nashville and an active member of the Nashville Scholars of the Three-Pipe Problem and other science societies. He spent 3 years as headlight of the Beacon Society. Bill is a former radio news director and newspaper editor. He was invested in the adventuresses of Sherlock Holmes as the famous government expert, which was derived from his long career in public affairs, including service in the U.S. Congress, Senate, White House, and Tennessee Governor's Office. Bill was invested as White Mason in the Baker Street Irregulars in 2015. Julie McKuras is a graduate of Purdue University and the University of Minnesota with 2 very different degrees, nursing and film studies. She used the first degree when she was an intensive care and coronary nurse in hospitals in Indiana and Minnesota, and currently uses the second degree sitting and watching movies. A speaker at numerous conferences, she's co-author of 3 Baker Street Journal Christmas annuals and of Sherlockian Heresies. She's contributed to the Baker Street Journal, Canadian Holmes, the Serpentine Muse, the Sherlock Holmes Journal, and has essays printed in A West Wind and Stimulating Medicine. Additionally, she has edited the Friends of the Sherlock Holmes Collections newsletter for 23 years. She's a member of the Norwegian Explorers of Minnesota, where she served as president for 9 years, the Sherlock Holmes Society of London, the Hounds of the Baskerville Sick, the Speckled Band of Boston, the Copper Beeches, and other science societies. She received her investiture, the Duchess of Devonshire, in 2001. Bill Mason and Julie McKuras, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you.
Now, Bill, you are a repeat offender here, if I am not mistaken.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, I can't believe you decided to come back. You joined us back in season 13, where we talked about your book, A Holmes by Any Other Name. So it's nice to have you back again.
Thank you.
And Julie, I believe this is your 3rd time on the show. You were most recently with us on episode 185 talking about William Baring Gould for, I think, the BSJ Christmas Annual in season 14. And then you were again with us in season 13 talking about the Norwegian Explorers Conference that year, Dark Places, Wicked Companions, and Strange Experiences.
Wasn't that a great title?
It really was. It really sums up our conversation here today.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, since we've already chatted with both of you about your first meetings with Sherlock Holmes, we won't retread that, but I think we want to jump right into it. Why don't you talk a little bit about your impression of the BSI history series before you became part of it? Julie, why don't you start out?
Well, I was just enchanted by those books. I bought the first copy, the early 30s or late 30s, because I just had an opportunity to pick one up. And after reading it, I thought, gee, I hope this continues. So it was just a wonderful book. It's a wonderful reference. And being close friends with John Lellenberg, I was really happy to see how he laid it out. He had such a great writing style, and it had so much information. And I think the big thing about it was, if he hadn't done it, how much of that history would be lost?
That's a great point. And you mentioned that in the introduction to this book about, I think it was Bliss Austin in 1984 at the BSI dinner was talking about the BSI dinner in 1944, which was a big dinner. I think that was the trilogy dinner. And lots of things happened during that time and since then. And you credit John Lullenberg as having quoted Bliss Austin and realizing after Bliss died in 1988 that these stories will get lost with these individuals if we don't start documenting them, if we don't start interviewing them and looking at the sources and whatnot. So he really got us off on that right foot. Bill, what about you? What was your impression of the BSI history series as you came upon it?
Well, as a collector, I first collected them, and then I decided I better read them. And and I'm like Julie, I was very impressed with it. Lullenberg was a great writer, and he did such a great thing with it. And it was impressive to learn about those early giants and the giants who still continue, many of them, through this period that we're writing about. John, of course, had an advantage we didn't have. He finished his last book, 27 years ago now. And he had the luxury of talking firsthand with a lot of those people who were around in the period he was writing about. We didn't get that luxury. All the people we were writing about in this book, with section of a brief mention of Peter Blau, I think, are pretty much gone. So we had to rely on the documentary evidence to get through this. And I'm sure John would have he did that as well, of course, but we had a little bit of a disadvantage in what we were trying to do.
Did you, was it really a disadvantage? Because one of the things that I took away from this fabulous book, by the way, and I think it's not only a continuation of John's series, but I think it's a step ahead, in several ways. It seemed to me just from reading the book that there was much more documentation going on in the 50s than there had been in prior years. Wasn't there more in terms of records and details? Wasn't there more available?
I think we were blessed with Edgar Smith having secretaries.
That's right.
Who typed everything and kept copies of it. So that was wonderful documentary evidence. There were also letters that were available. And I think it's worth mentioning that when we began the project, we talked about what format should we use. And I will be forever grateful to Bill for saying we shouldn't do it the way John did it, just, kind of a narrative style throughout. So we chose to do this by saying, here's what happened at the dinner. Here's the people who were invested. And then doing set chapters on things that happened throughout the particular years, such as the Silver Blaze or, what books came out. So while we greatly admired John's style, we adapted a different way of doing it.
Yeah, that's one thing that really stood out to me. The Irregular Chronicles of the Early 50s covers 1951 through 1955. And each year is a chapter, and each chapter has multiple sections. And every chapter begins with the year 1950 blank, right? So it's a grounding in the history, what was going on in the world in that particular year to kind of give us a sense, give us some context as to what was going on. And then, as you say, there's the dinner, the BSI dinner that you cover, literary developments, which I love, and as we see preparation for the next year's dinner, and then you sprinkle in any of the personages or events related to the BSI, the unveiling of a plaque over in St. Bart's in London, etc. So lots of things get to pop up amid that framework that you give it. And Julie, you and I were talking during the BSI weekend about the history of a particular year and how I think you said you had some help on that. You want to talk about that a little bit?
We did have help on a number of subjects, such as a plaque that went up. Christopher Music did one for us. We had some coverage on other plaques that were installed, but the people who helped us were just tremendous. Ray Riethmeyer did a lovely chapter on the last will and testament of Sherlock Holmes, as looking at it from his lawyerly background. So there were just a number of people who stepped in to help. We wanted their voices to be heard. Andy Fusco wrote about the Scion of Four. I'm feeling like I'm going to forget somebody right now, but it was a good move, I think, for us to involve other people who had a particular interest and information
Yeah, you've got
about
Michael
subjects
Muir
that we
in
wanted
here
to
too.
cover. Pardon me?
You've got Michael Muir in here too.
Michael Muir. Don't tell him I forgot him.
No, that's all right. But how about this? The grounding of the history of a particular year, where 1951 began for many, as had numerous other New Year's days, with heavy heads, reddened eyes, and an overall fatigue after the previous night's celebrations. Who wrote the introductions like that?
I did.
Julie did.
That is amazing, Julie.
Well, thank you.
I think that's what we talked about at breakfast. See, my head was was fatigued and my eyes were reddened, and I was heavy-headed that morning when we talked about it at breakfast. So it didn't quite hit me that was you. That was you, the historian in you.
Yeah.
Well, I do like to ground things because what was happening with the BSI didn't really exist in a vacuum. There were many other factors for the irregulars. For instance, we talk a bit about how after World War II and in the beginning of the 50s, they were installing more highways. There were homes being built in areas that we would call the suburbs, which allowed many people who had lived inside places like New York City to now live in their own suburban house, and the picket fence, white picket fence. And I think that really changed things. They were no longer just urban dwellers. So, looking at it that way, I think was an interesting thing to research and to think about how did it change these people? It changed their commutes to job or their businesses. I wish I could say more about it and I could go on and on, frankly. But there was so much going on each year.
Yeah, but I think that's the real insight, that makes this book so special. I mean, just, for our listeners who might not be aware of the outline of the prior work, John Lellenberg, I didn't realize it was 27 years ago that he did his last book. Mm-hmm. But John was a titan, an irreplaceable figure in the Sherlockian world who preserved the history of, Sherlockian activities in the United States, but certainly the Baker Street Irregulars. It's an invaluable contribution. He wrote 5 books plus sources and methods. And, you describe very well his sort of approach. I mean, it's a great compilation of data, and it was a terrific contribution to the whole organization. I know the BSI probably wouldn't be where it is today without that bedrock of that. But this is really a wonderful book because of this approach you have. In the Sherlockian world, you've got these little insights. For example, London is a character. London is a character in the world of Sherlock Holmes, and it's also a character in some of the TV Sherlockian things like the Benedict Cumberbatch series. But here you've used society as a character, which you were just talking about, and it's the 1950s, when so much is going on. I mean, the fact is, this is like 370 pages, just on 4 years or 5 years. And the layout, this is a slightly larger size. It's a lot easier to read. And there's pictures, there's photographs, there's color. It's really splendid. And just in going through it, I realized 2 wonderful things about this book. One is it's the only Sherlockian history I will ever receive or anyone will ever write that has a photograph of Marilyn Monroe in it.
We're working on getting her involved in the next one.
And second, so if that doesn't pique readers' interest, I don't know what will. And then
the fold out is great, though.
The fold
out, that's the thing.
And then you've got all the photographs of the dinners with people identified, and the sources and methods that you've got there. So the whole thing is much more interesting. Well, not much more interesting. It's just different. It's a window into the time. You've got society as a character here. So I think that's really makes it very special.
I think another thing that we worked hard on was looking at not only the people who were irregulars, but we had, for each dinner, using a phrase from John Lillenberg and Peter Blau, that they were called the small I irregulars. So we thought, who are these people? They showed up at a dinner or two or three. Some of them went on to become irregulars, others didn't. But we wanted to know, who were these people that were in the seats, who were in the pictures? And that was another interesting research project to find that out. And in retrospect, I'm really glad we did.
Well, talk a little bit more about that, if you can, Julie and or Bill, because to me, that or those multiple stories tell a greater story about the BSI. And it feels to me like the BSI is really coming into its own in the 1950s. In the 1940s, it felt like it was a time of discovery, a time of maybe starting traditions, but in the 50s, it really feels grounded and rooted, and that the BSI exists with a lot more confidence. Talk about how these people came into connection with the BSI or the dinners, and what greater story that tells.
Well, for some of the contact, we'll never know. But I agree that it had changed in the 1950s, probably marked by having dinners in some place other than the hotel that had a Victorian setting. They were moving ahead. And these people who, we know who the irregulars are, but these people who just appeared, apparently from thin air, if you look at them, they were incredibly interesting people. They were journalists, they were artists, they were television producers. We'll get into that in this next section of the book, in the next version of the book. But, you have to look at it and think, number one, how did they get into the picture or into the dinners? Who was their contact? And that's something we don't know. But I think it makes a bigger story of the kind of people that Edgar Smith was interested in. And I don't know if Bill has any comments about that.
I wanted to touch on another point you just made, Scott, was about how there, through all the major events of this period we're writing about, like the exhibitions in London and New York, the play on Broadway that Basil Rathbone did, the appearance of The Exploits of Sherlock Holmes by John Dixon Carr and Adrian Conan Doyle, and the TV series by Sidney Sheldon. These got national attention. They weren't necessarily successful events in some ways, but one thing they did do was create a venue for the Baker Street Irregulars to get a national reputation. Because when the people who were writing about these events, and these people who were doing television spots about them or magazine interviews, who did they turn to? They didn't turn to literary teachers at the colleges and universities. They turned to Baker Street Irregulars, especially Edgar Smith and Vincent Starrett, but others as well. And it gave them, talk about coming into their own, they really did come into their own. They became the nationally known group and the experts on Sherlock Holmes that everyone wanted to talk to. For the Baker Street Irregulars, I think in this period, you made the point that they came into their own, and they really did in a national way.
Yeah, and we've got, of course, the Heritage Press edition of the canon that came out, clearly sanctioned by the Conan Doyle estate, and with the introductions by Edgar Smith and Vincent Starrett. So that was something that continued on in the publishing world. And even, I think it was in maybe in the first chapter, there was some talk of creating an NBC, I believe, program where the Irregulars would be involved. Rex Stout, perhaps, hosting a kind of a mystery theater kind of program. Can you refresh my memory on that?
I can. It was kind of something that seemed to come out of the clouds. That a note from Christopher Morley to Edgar Smith saying, I think this television program is a good idea, which leads one to think perhaps there had been some conversation about this prior to that letter. But the subsequent stuttered a little bit there. The rest of the context of those letters are all talking about the new BSI television program. And throughout this, 1951, Edgar Smith was so positive that this was a television program that would really capture readers' attention, or the viewers' attention. And he wanted to use well-known writers who did mysteries. He wanted to also include some of the stories from writers who had passed. I'm sure there had to be some investigation into estates to get that permission. And he wanted to have irregulars who would, after the airing of a program, the irregulars would then talk about, yes, here's the ups and downs of this story, and just make other comments. So it was like a year-long project, and Edgar Smith seemed so positive that this was going to go through. The lawyers had okayed everything. Contracts had been signed. They had people they wanted to include. And then everything just stopped. And we have no real idea why it stopped. Anybody's guess is as good as mine. I don't know if there was a problem with the contract. My first speculation is always, what did the Doyle brothers do? Because you could usually follow a thread to any problem, be it publishing or film or television. You could follow the thread to the Doyles, but I found no evidence that they had really inserted themselves into it, and they aren't mentioned in any of the letters. But I have to wonder why did it just die on the vine?
Well, it could have been a change of leadership at NBC and a sudden, shift in their priorities. And let's not forget, television was still in its early days in 1951, 52. Even some of the greats from entertainment, like Jack Benny, he was still doing radio up until 1955 at the same time he was doing television. So there may have been some uncertainty as to the direction of the television industry at the time. So,
and you had to have a sponsor.
Oh, right. Well, you couldn't get Ford or General Motors to sponsor it, huh?
Well, that would have been ideal. But there was also the issue that there weren't a tremendous number of television stations.
Right.
And those stations were usually in very urban areas.
Right.
So not everyone could watch television. So maybe it was an idea of limited viewers.
Yeah, or some mix of all of the above.
Yeah.
Well. Say one thing that occurs to me that I don't know that we've asked you about. How did you get the job to do this? How did it's been 27 years ago since John's last book. How did the idea saying, "Hey, I got a great idea. Why don't we get Julie and Bill to do this?" And how'd that all happen?
Well, it's my understanding that attempts had been made prior to this, since Lellenberg finished his series, to get this going again, and they kind of fell through. And I don't know the details on all of that, but I was actually approached by Julie. She'll have to give you the initial contact herself.
I got a note from the powers that be, saying it was high time to do another history. And they wanted me to do it, as well as another individual who was unable to commit to that. And my first thought was, I'm not doing this by myself.
Smart move.
Good decision.
And my second thought was, I'm not going to let someone pick somebody I'm going to work with that I don't know has the same, how to be kind, has the same view of what we're going to do. I wanted someone I knew would be a good working relationship. And I wish I could tell you that I sat down and there was a light bulb above my head that said Bill Mason. But it was my husband, Mike, who said, what about Bill Mason? And I thought, yeah, what about Bill Mason? And lo and behold, he said yes. And it's been a real pleasure. So I always figured they contacted me. I have no idea how many people before me said no.
Well, better not to know. Yeah.
Well,
so how long did the whole thing take? I mean, when did you get your, I mean, roughly, is this, 2 months, 2 years, 10 years,
About 2 years, I think.
yeah,
Closer to it.
I think we had about 2 years to research and write. And then there's always handing it over for the final go over and putting it together in printable fashion.
Yeah, well, John, and who did the layout? Was that John Berquist did the layout
Yes,
for this?
it was John.
Great job. So where did you start? So there you are, getting the note, I got to start somewhere, you say to yourself. And so the first thing you did was?
We went to the Lilly Library together.
Yes, we did.
Early on. And spent a long time pulling out files and picking out things we needed to have and things that were relevant for the chapters we were writing for each other. And that was a very big help. And then, of course, there's the newspaper archives, which we delved into as deeply as we could. That's the first two starting places I can think of.
And I went over Vincent Sterrett's correspondence that's held at the University of Minnesota. But we did spend a little time up front saying, how are we going to format this?
Yeah.
And came to the organization that we've already discussed. But probably the first thing I did was sit down and retype things, like the minutes of the BSI dinner or some of the letters that were there. So we had a format that had some things already in it. And then it was a question of what else happened, what else is relevant to this, who was involved. And the other thing we did was Bill and I decided, what do each of us want to write? And we came to very good separation of powers. And I'm not sure you can read it and know which one of us wrote what. And that was our goal.
Yeah. Did you do any traveling as part of your research? Did you, beyond, Lilly and University of Minnesota?
No,
not really. This is home-based research. The wonders of modern technology helped us with that.
That's great.
Yeah, faraway places came to us. But, we had different people that we contacted who were helpful. I know for this next book, I've already gone to the Bowling Green University to look at the Ned Gaiman correspondence.
For our listeners, explain a sentence or two about what that is, and why that's important.
Why, which one is important?
The correspondence, why, what that's all about and why that would be important.
I think it just offers a real contemporary view of what was going on. And it really reflects a lot of the fact that these people, most of them anyway, seem to be really good friends.
And remember, of course, too, that the subtitle of the book, An Archival History of the Baker Street Irregulars, the correspondence and the documentation gives you that archival element that is what we were looking for in the first place.
Well, we didn't really have anybody we could ask questions of either.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah. So we hope we represented them well.
When as you have gone on these searches at the Lilly Library, and I would imagine at your own home base there, Julie, at the University of Minnesota, and Bowling Green, as you say, have there been any gaps that you found? Are there any mysteries to be solved other than the television thing we were talking about before? Are there any things that you wished that you had access to?
Bill, I don't know if you can think of anything. I'm sort of drawing a blank on that.
The fact that they're mysteries makes them unknown. There's probably plenty of things we need to know and would love to know. A lot of the personal relationships and personal ideas about each other that we'll never know because they weren't committed to paper. So you can only speculate about how people actually got along, and you can see a lot of warmth between people like Starrett and Smith, and a genuine affection. And then you see some more clinical type letters that you wonder about how, just like the personalities we have today, how many are just warm personal friendships and how many are just, more professional, cut and dried type of approaches. So that's what I'd like to know is some of these personal feelings between each other. But then I guess you never know those things.
I would say one thing that interests me is how did some of these people get invited to the dinner?
Yeah.
Who was their contact person? What was their interest? Did they have an interest in Sherlock Holmes and want to come to the dinner? Or did someone make a suggestion? Was it someone Edgar Smith met? Was it someone Elmer Davis met that said this would be a good person? He would be a good addition to our dinner. And I wish there was more information about that.
Yeah, and it's funny because this comes at a time, and I think we see this with some of the correspondence and some of your commentary, where, certainly Edgar was running things really well, had his whole secretarial pool there, the dinners were growing. And of course, Christopher Morley at the time was becoming more of a curmudgeon. Someone who, kind of looked back to those early days when it was just he and a dozen or so of his friends sitting around a table and was almost longing for those more intimate settings. And there was one, I think it was in 52 or 53, where you mentioned toward the end of the year, Edgar was trying to talk Morley up to convince him to come to the dinner. Can you talk a little bit about their relationship and perhaps what Morley's perception was of the growing group at this point?
Well, I think looking at John Lillenberg's books, it was obvious sometime, I think even as early as the mid-1940s, that Christopher Morley thought this whole idea of a dinner was getting out of hand. He didn't like some of the people who were coming, and they were named in his correspondence because they were loud or boisterous, which I never would have thought would be a problem with that group, but apparently it was for him. And I think he was beginning to lose interest. He wanted the small, intimate dinners where people could talk, and lamented the growing size of the dinners. So, as it went forward, he seemed to play less of a role. There was always apparently a very warm friendship between Morley and Edgar Smith, which I think the correspondence indicates. But he came to the 1951 dinner and then never was able to come to another one because of his health.
Yeah, his health was in very poor shape, and I think that contributed to his attitude toward the Baker Street Irregulars as well.
Mm-hmm. He had a series of strokes, which made it difficult for him.
I hope he didn't blame any of those boisterous people for his condition.
Well, if he did, he didn't commit it to paper.
So one of the people that looms large in the early 50s, and perhaps is a person who is less known today, is Elmer Davis. He was certainly a big influence in a lot of spheres in those early days of the BSI. Can you tell us, maybe give us a little thumbnail about who Elmer Davis was and what his impact to the BSI might have been?
Well, I'm happy to talk about Elmer Davis. Came from a small town in Indiana. Went to school, went overseas, and came back and was working. I'm going to blank out where he was working, but it was in the radio business. And as World War II was looming, one of the well-known journalists who usually talked on the radio was sent to London to see how the war was going to go. And they asked Davis to step in. So Elmer Davis had a nightly radio show, I believe, and they said what was comforting about him was his Indiana twang. And having lived in Indiana for any number of years, I know exactly what they're talking about. It was kind of somebody who you would think you would just sit down at the old Cracker Barrel and discuss things by the fire. But he was really an intelligent man and a very driven man. And I appreciated learning about how he came to be a well-known voice over the radio, particularly during World War II, and was so well-known that Franklin Roosevelt had him come in to run the Office of War Information. And Davis's view was, whatever is going on in the war, the people of the United States should know about it. Our enemies shouldn't know more about this than we do. So he really changed the way that information was given to the people in the United States about what was going on internationally. And, you know, he kept up in the radio for quite some time. He was also extremely active in going up against oh man, you're going to have to fix this part. Joe McCarthy.
Yeah, McCarthy.
And, we'll have to fix Joe McCarthy. That's
yeah. Well, he's another one that we don't have to worry about. But he was adamant against Joe McCarthy and the idea of the House of Inquiries into the Un-American Activities. And I found a really interesting newspaper article that he was in Minneapolis. And it was a great thing. He was giving a talk at the University of Minnesota for people who it was primarily for journalists, but I'm sure it drew a bigger crowd than that. And just talked about how people deserve to know the truth. And it was a great article. And of course, I was just thrilled because there was a picture in it, the newspaper, of Elmer Davis with Minneapolis's own E.W. McDermott, who was the head of the Norwegian explorers. And I couldn't get a good copy from the newspaper. It just was too blurry. And you know the various rabbit holes one goes down when you're trying to find information. But I found out that all of the Minneapolis Star-Tribune photographs were at the History Center, Minnesota History Center. So I was able to go in, find that photo, and have them do a good scan for me. So that's one of the things that I was most pleased about, was that photo of the two of them. And also I loved finding out that Elmer Davis was in the very beginning of the movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still, the 1951 version. You know, they wanted people who were a voice of reason, talking about the invasion from outer space, which I'm not sure how that can work, that you can be very calm about an unidentified flying object landing by the White House, but he did it. He had that. He had that ability to be the voice of reason. So someone who I think isn't as well known as he should be.
And he was really not only a contemporary, but a co-worker of Edward R. Murrow.
Yes.
Two of them at CBS Radio together, both not fans of Senator Joseph McCarthy, as you say, and trusted voices across America. So what an asset for the BSI to have Elmer Davis at their ready. And if I recall correctly, it was Elmer Davis who developed the BSI's constitution and bylaws.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So not just a pretty voice.
He was a pretty face too. But he contributed so much, and as I said, I wish he was better known to people for what he did.
Well, he will be now, thanks to your book.
Well, I hope people will look even further into him.
Well, speaking of looking further, one can't help but note that this book covers 1951 and 1955, which leads to the question, how long until we get to read about 1956 and 1957 and 1958, and what's that scheme look like?
Well, we're working on it now. We're hoping that the next book will come out in January of 2028, I believe they've set the goal for, and that's what we're hoping to do. We're already writing away.
Oh, good.
And what years will that cover?
1956 through 1960.
Okay.
And that'll be what we do, and somebody else will take over at that point. But the 1950s has a very natural bookend. In 51, we start out with the relaunch of the Baker Street Journal. And in late in 1960, we end up with the untimely death of Edgar W. Smith.
Right.
So it's quite a bookend for that whole decade, to eventful decade for the Baker Street Irregulars.
What a great decade for you to spend your time on.
Mm.
It's been such a learning experience. Not just, as we say, not just with the BSI, but what was going on in the world and who those people were. And as we say, this next book has a lot of changes. Some of the stalwarts will pass away. And as Bill said, 1960, we have Edgar Smith pass away. So it's a natural ending for that.
I feel like we should have had a spoiler alert for people.
Gosh, I hope I didn't give much away.
They might not buy it now.
Uh-oh. Well, we can edit that out.
Yeah, right.
We can just say Edgar wasn't looking very well. We were worried about it.
Cliffhanger. Yeah,
cliffhanger.
Yeah, there you go.
Say, were there any big surprises along the way? Anything where you and Bill said, where you and Julie said, "Gee, I didn't know that. Wow, how about that?"
Well, most of it is I didn't know that. I don't know that there were surprises. I'll tell you one thread that ran through this whole book that really struck me was this animosity, which we already knew about, between Adrian Conan Doyle and the Baker Street Irregulars, and especially Edgar Smith. They feuded in public and in private the whole period we wrote about, and he was such a money hungry jerk about being. Having a relationship with the Baker Street Irregulars, and Smith tried to bury the hatchet with him in early 1952 as the exhibition came to town, and it just never seemed to take. So I didn't realize that it was, I guess, as deep, and I knew it was there, but I didn't realize it was deep and personal as it was between Adrian and Edgar Smith.
Yeah.
John Lullenberg used the phrase, if you handed this person an olive branch, they would take it and beat you with it. I thought about that when I was reading some of this correspondence with Adrian Conan Doyle. He was always such a superior person and loved suing people.
Well, it's completely fitting then that Edgar's nickname for Adrian was Adrenaline.
Adrenaline. Yeah.
Yes.
I always had the sense that Adrian was one of these people who felt that if you're going to print the word Sherlock on a piece of paper somewhere, you should be sending me some money.
Oh, absolutely.
And
But he
if I
could be
don't,
so.
yeah, and if I don't get the money, you're defrauding me. I mean,
But he could be so petty too. I mean,
Yeah.
when they were coming out with the 2-volume edition of the Doubleday, complete Sherlock Holmes, all the Sherlockians wanted to do was fix the obvious errors in it. Remove that duplicate passage from the resident patient that only belonged in the cardboard box. And Adrian would not even accept those kinds of changes because he didn't like the fact that Edgar Smith was one of the people making the recommendations and wouldn't allow them in. So the Doubleday 2-volume edition in 1953 perpetuates the errors from the earlier edition only because of Adrian's pettiness. There was nothing in it for him financially, just a personal kind of petty vindictiveness toward Edgar Smith that prevented that from being a better edition.
Well, and I think he was so set on always making sure that everyone knew his father had written the stories. You know, his father was the hero in this. Sherlock Holmes was just a mere literary character. And that belief runs through just about every bit of correspondence you'll ever find. He, as Bill said, he didn't want things corrected because his father had done it. So it was somewhat of a worshipful look at his father and how it would make money.
And the thing is, though, when you look at some of Adrian's other correspondence, he could be very generous with ideas, with assets, with time, when appropriately remunerated.
Well, who can, Scott?
Well, I don't know, Bill, but if you send me $20, I'll tell you. So, as you think ahead to this next volume, which, as you say, covers 1956, 1960, are there gaps you're looking to fill? Is there content or maybe archival information, correspondence, etc., that you would like help uncovering? Like if any of our listeners, for example, happen to have some things, is that something that you would welcome help with?
Oh, yes, that would be great. You know, we don't know it's there unless you let us know it's there. So if you have things from the period of 56 through 60, let us know. Ask us about it. Get in touch with Julie or me, either one, and we would love to hear about it and look at it. And the odds are very good it would be included because it is an archival history. And that kind of documentation would be great. Smith had lost his secretary by the second half of the decade, so we don't have as much carbon copy of all the correspondence that he sent out that we did for the first half. So that kind of correspondence and letters maybe in private hands at this point that would be wonderful us to see.
Excellent.
Oh, I completely agree with Bill. So much was made the first half of this series good was we had all these copies of the Smith correspondence. And then he retired, and apparently his secretary did not come along for the ride. She continued to work at General Motors, so he didn't have anyone to do that. So there is not as much correspondence that we're aware of. And as Bill said, if anybody has anything like that, we would really welcome their generosity in letting us perhaps have a look at it. We promise we won't steal it. Well, I'm only speaking for myself. I don't know about that.
You know, I'm kicking myself now. It was at an early BSI dinner for me, sometime in the late 1990s. And it was, I don't know if any of you recall, it was a dinner where we had White Rock in the center of the table, and they replicated the curried chicken that Mrs. Hudson made. It was a horrible dinner. But I was seated right next to, I believe it was D. Alexander, who was one of Edgar's secretaries. And my gosh, I wish I knew then what I know now, because the conversation would have been peppered with a lot more questions than it was, as I was seated next to this very pleasant lady.
She was a real help to John Lillenberg when in his series, because she had stories to tell.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate that you didn't have more of an opportunity to. It's like if I knew then what I know now.
Yeah. Oh, well. If folks would like to pick up a copy of Irregular Chronicles of the Early 50s, you can know now what we knew then. And it's available at the BSI website. We'll put a link in the show notes to that. And if you can buttonhole Bill or Julie at an event, I'm sure they would be glad to sign it for you, as they did during the BSI weekend. Meanwhile, Bill and Julie, we wish you all the best on the continued project, and thank you for joining us here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for including us.
It's a triumph, I think. The book is, really special and interesting, and I think it will be more interesting to a wider group of people who are interested in Sherlockian things, but also in, what was going on in the 1950s and the cultural impact of some of those changes and how they affected the Sherlockian world. I think it's a real triumph. I love the structure and the opportunity to talk to them about, how they conceived of that. Each year is sort of a section, and then as, you pointed out and they pointed out, they've got these sort of different chapters within the section on various things. And as I said, it's the only Sherlockian book I will likely ever get with a photograph of Marilyn Monroe in it.
It's a great time. Well, look, the early 1950s, just in U.S. history, is just rich with opportunity and industry and entertainment. So it was just a booming time following World War II. And one of the things that struck me is this mystery of the disappearing television show. Even though we don't know what happened or why, the fact that the BSI was looking at the changing media landscape and trying to adopt those various media to storytelling and to the world of Sherlock Holmes and Sherlockians just shows that the BSI was never meant to be completely rooted in 1895. We have our origins and Sherlock Holmes's origins from those Victorian times, but they moved on from the Murray Hill Hotel, a Victorian hotel, partly out of necessity because it was demolished, but they embraced the modern age. And whether it was print or radio or television or whatever came next, the BSI has always continued to adapt. And I think that's a wonderful symbol for the world going forward. The conversation kept going, and we have it as bonus content for our subscribers. We have a quick sample here. If you'd like to hear the entire thing, just sign up at patreon.com/IHearOfSherlock or iHearOfSherlock.substack.com.
I think one of the things that really caused that was finding out about that proposed television show. That took up quite a few pages, but we thought it was worth including because it just indicated Edgar Smith had big plans, and worked so hard on this, and then to have it just disappear.
If you'd like to hear the rest of this bonus episode, please sign up with us as a supporter. Well, as I threatened early in the show, Christian Mongard is back with another one of his wonderful additions to our film review series called Examining the Pictures.
Sherlock Holmes in New York. No, it's not a repeat from last time. It's the old one, which is not as good as the new one, Elementary. But it's still quite fun to watch and at times even laugh at. My name is Christian Mongard. Welcome to Examining the Pictures. The film I'm going to talk about today is from 1976 and it's a TV production called Sherlock Holmes in New York. It's directed by Boris Sagal, written by Alvin Sapinsley, and it is starring Roger Moore as Sherlock Holmes, Patrick Macnee as Dr. Watson, John Huston as Professor Moriarty, and Charlotte Rampling as Irene Adler. It was shown on TV in America, but in cinemas in parts of Europe, though not in Denmark, I believe. The year is 1901, and Sherlock Holmes has just wiped out most of the evil Professor Moriarty's organization. The professor himself escaped after a brief encounter with the great detective, in which he promises Holmes to bring him down and humiliate him by carrying out the crime of the century right in front of Holmes' very eyes and without Holmes being able to do anything about it. It turns out that the crime Moriarty is talking about is taking place in New York and that it involves a certain singer and actress, Irene Adler, and her son Scott, who is 9 years old, precisely the number of years it has been since Holmes last saw Adler. The boy is played by Roger Moore's own son, Geoffrey. It turns out that the boy has been kidnapped and that Moriarty has stolen the large gold reserves of many different countries from the vaults of a bank in Manhattan. This will result in an international incident, perhaps even war, unless the gold is returned within a few days. The police and the bank's manager approach Holmes and ask for his help. But Moriarty has already informed the detective that if he wants to keep Scott alive, he has to refuse to help solve the case. What a conundrum, what a pickle, what a predicament to be in. Holmes is ready to throw in the towel, but then Watson steps up and lights a fire under his friend. This is more or less the only sensible thing Patrick Macnee's somewhat dim-witted and absent-minded Watson does throughout the film. He doesn't really seem to be interested in the case or understand what it all is about. When the two, Holmes and Watson, arrive in New York, Watson mostly serves as comic relief, complaining about the time difference and stating the obvious. He is almost a parody of an earlier Watson played by Nigel Bruce. Macnee, who was a stage and screen veteran, got to play a more observant Watson to Christopher Lee's Holmes in 2 TV films in the 90s, and in 1993 he even got to play the detective himself in The Hound of London. Roger Moore's Sherlock Holmes is a more dignified and aristocratic, if not that brilliant, character in the film. He even gets to show off his ability to disguise himself a couple of times, though the disguises are so exaggerated that one wonders why nobody sees through them, especially in the beginning when Holmes shows up at Moriarty's lair as Colonel Moran and actually fools the professor even though he looks like a character from a pantomime.
Ah, Colonel Moran, your punctuality itself. Has everything proceeded according to schedule?
Indeed it has. Number 10, Moran to Moriarty, with brackish cigar case at midnight exactly.
Perfect?
With one exception. A trifling one, perhaps. But I simply do not happen to be Colonel Moran.
Sherlock Holmes.
At your service. I can well imagine the profundity of your disappointment, Professor Moriarty, and you cannot fail to realize that there can only be one explanation for my having successfully penetrated the most carefully concealed lodgings in the whole of London.
Theatricality is a key word when it comes to Sherlock Holmes in New York. The film reeks of having been shot in a studio, and even though the exterior shots from the streets of London and New York look the part, they also look very much alike, it still doesn't feel real. I do actually like the atmosphere of studio shot films, especially when it helps the fantasy-like quality of the film in question, like with young Sherlock Holmes. But here it mostly shows off the limitations of the budget and shoot. And when the film takes us into 221B Baker Street or other interior locations, it almost feels like a piece of theatre, not least in the stodgy way it is photographed and staged. According to David Stuart Davies in his book Starring Sherlock Holmes, the film was conceived to make use of the expensive New York period sets built for Hello Dolly from 1969 at the Fox backlot in Hollywood. Theatrical is also something one could use to describe the performances, perhaps with Charlotte Rampling as the lone exception. She doesn't need to talk or move much to convey emotions. But John Huston, the actor and director who just before this film placed the monstrous Noah Cross in the brilliant Chinatown from 1974, gives us an larger-than-life Professor Moriarty. He really plays it big, and the professor has the exact same lair in New York as in London. Holmes even remarks upon it, and the same deadly traps he tries to use on Holmes, a trapdoor to the river below the city, a falling chandelier, and a knife-throwing mechanism. It all is a bit ridiculous. A fun little piece of trivia. On his desk, Moriarty has a statuette of a falcon, just like the one from Huston's first film as a director, the wonderful Dashiell Hammett adaptation, The Maltese Falcon from 1941. Sherlock Holmes in New York is not very canonical, and I would argue that both Sherlock Holmes' relationship with Irene Adler, the suggestion that he is Scott's father, the portrayals of Dr. Watson and Moriarty, all are inventions of someone who doesn't know or care for the stories about the detective and his cases. One thing about the plot I'm not really sure that I understand is why Moriarty lures Holmes and Watson to New York at all. Yes, he wants to humiliate Holmes, but why risk it, knowing the mind and resources of Holmes? If Moriarty just had stolen the gold, Holmes would have had to spend 5 or 10 days coming to New York by steamship. Moriarty and the gold would probably be long gone by then. Ah well. Ukrainian-born Boris Sagal is not a director I am very familiar with. He has done a lot of television and a lot of films, but I do like his take on the horror writer Richard Matheson's chilling novel I Am Legend in The Omega Man from 1971, starring Charlton Heston, and I did see and love the miniseries Rich Man, Poor Man that Sagal made in the 1970s, starring Peter Strauss and Nick Nolte. Alvin Sapinsley primarily wrote for television during his career that began in the late 40s, mostly westerns and crime shows, and more or less stopped working by the end of the 70s. He was blacklisted for a time in the 50s for having attended Communist Party meetings. I can't say I wasn't entertained by Sherlock Holmes in New York, which is a peculiar mix of drama, comedy, and mystery. Roger Moore is a suave Holmes, almost a bit James Bond-like, a character he was already in the midst of playing at the time. Perhaps that is also why the plan of Moriarty almost mirrors the one of Auric Goldfinger, world domination being the end goal of stealing all that gold. In Moore's Holmes there are also traces of the two TV characters that made him famous in the 60s and 70s, Simon Templar in The Saint and Lord Brett Sinclair in The Persuaders. I like Roger Moore as an actor who is always a bit tongue-in-cheek, but that also makes it difficult to take him seriously when he plays something else like Sherlock Holmes. According to Peter Haining's book, The Television Sherlock Holmes, Roger Moore has said about the film, "What I most like about playing Holmes is that there is more dialogue than I ever had in 120 Saint episodes and 2 Bond films." If you want to watch the film, you can get it on physical media, DVD or Blu-ray, but it can also be found on YouTube. That's all for now. My name is Christian Mongard, and this was Examining the Pictures. Thank you for listening.
Have you ever watched that all the way through?
Oh, yeah, I remember. I've seen it at least twice. I mean, what I remember about it is, everything Christian talks about. You know, I thought, I'm very fond of John Huston, and, he has this wonderful, gravelly voice, and, I liked him as Moriarty, but Christian is exactly right. I mean, the whole, it's an unsatisfying picture. The plot doesn't make much sense. You've got real aces in there like Charlotte Rampling, Houston. But well, what do you think? What did you think of it?
Well, I mean, I agree. It reeks of made for TV, and there is one line that will never leave my mind. One that ruins the entire atmosphere for me, and it's John Huston as Moriarty, who has no ability to maintain a British or Irish accent, who says, "Blast you, Holmes, blast you."
Sounds like his father there, Walter Houston, and the treasure of Sierra Madre.
Yeah, exactly. It may as well have been Yosemite Sam saying that line.
Blast you. Well, well, you got to blame the director. But interesting. I didn't realize that one of the big impetuses for this picture was using the sets that they'd built for Hello, Dolly. But I guess it makes sense.
Well, those jaunty strings means, of course, that it's time for everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz program. That's right, it's Canonical Couplet, where we give you 2 lines of poetry and ask you to come up with your very best guess of which Sherlock Holmes story we're talking about. And if we choose your name at random from all of the correct answers, then you will win a prize. The prize we have from the last time is something from our vault, so stay tuned for that. And the clue we gave you sounded something like this. Begun with pleasant lassitude, from a bath and then a smoke, the flame-like woman finished with a packet 'neath her cloak. Birds.
Yeah.
Against my better judgment, I'm going to turn to you now and ask you for the answer to this canonical couplet.
Oh, yes, that's the case where a father comes to Sherlock Holmes to beg him to stop a supernatural creature menacing his young child. But it turned out to be just a scout troop. It was the case Watson called the Sussex Campfire.
That's me slapping my forehead. No, unfortunately, you are slightly off.
Oh, no.
We will turn to our pal Eric Deckers, who greets us with Cavallo, I've solved it. That's Hungarian, by the way. He says Sherlock Holmes has been asked to find out who has been making unseen repairs to broken iron gates, fences, pans, and even carriage wheels. He discovers a 7-foot 4-inch tall blacksmith has been making these repairs secretly in the dead of night. It's the story Watson called The Adventure of the Industrious Giant. Actually, I don't remember anyone being overly tall in the canon, so this is more likely to be the adventure of the illustrious client, also known as the Incredible Melting Man. Yes, that is right, Eric. And the good news is we had a number of people who also shared in that estimation. It was, in fact, the illustrious client. So we're going to bring the prize wheel out and give it a big spin as it goes around and slows down on number 3. And in this case, that number belongs to Douglas Vaughn. Well, congratulations. We will have something from the IHO's vaults for you. So stay tuned for that. Well, this time around, we are going to be very generous. We're going to give someone a copy of Irregular Chronicles of the Early 50s. This is quite a value because it is a sizable book, as you heard from our interview. So put your thinking caps on and get ready for this clue. Weary after months of work, no need for an apology for 25 deductions by a master of graphology. If you know the answer to this episode's canonical couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If we choose your name from random, from all the correct submissions, you'll win. Good luck. Okie dokie, Bert. We've done it again.
Hooray!
Yeah. And now what?
Well, now we just get out. It's what we normally do at the end of one of these shows. We sort of get out the brooms. We dust the floor, pick up those bits of the script that are all over the place.
Yes.
Alcohol wipes over the edges of the microphone. Put those wax cylinders away. Trip over the sound effects booth. And
don't forget to shake the engineer's hand on your way out.
No, it's the engineer's thumb.
Careful of his thumb. Well, we will be thumbing our way through all kinds of things until we get back with you here for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. If you'd like to be in touch with us, please let us know. You can reach us at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. We love hearing your feedback and getting your input on things. In the meantime, this is the always open to feedback, Scott Monty.
And in the words of Victor Hatherley, it's always thumb-thing. I'm Bert Wolder.
And together we say...
The
game's
afoot.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.